Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Tasha Simms.
And I'm Mark Cron.
Frozen, but here. And I just heard today Beyond Hope. So he has moved Beyond Hope because, of course, we're coming from Vancouver. This is 100.5 FM, Co-op Radio, CFRO, Wednesday night, 6 to 7. You may be watching on Facebook right now and available as a podcast on consciouslivingradio.org after the interview. So I'm excited about today's interview. This is one of my favorite topics. Death has always been my teacher. And we've got our guests, Dr. Eben Alexander and Karen Newell. So Dr. Alexander is a neurosurgeon, an associate professor at Harvard Medical School, as well as an author and speaker. His book, Proof of Heaven, A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife, describes his near-death experience that happened in 2008 under a medically induced coma. He weaves his rich spiritual experience with neuroscience, quantum physics, cosmology, and philosophy. And also joining Karen Newell. She's an author and specialist in personal development with a diverse body of work that rests upon the foundation of heart-centered consciousness. Her lifelong interest in ancient cultures, sacred sites, catalyzed her drive to understand the purpose of our existence. She's an innovator in the field of brainwave entrainment audio meditation, also uses sacred acoustics to develop deeper guidance, achieve inspiration, improve wellness, and develop intuition. Together now, they've written Living in a Mindful Universe, a neurosurgeon's journey into the heart of consciousness. And they're going to be sharing a free event that you're all invited to on the Shift Network, Lifting the Veil on the Mysteries of the Afterlife. We're going to talk all about it. That's going to be April 13th online. It's called Harness the Wisdom, Wonder, and Life-Affirming Power of Near-Death Experiences. And as well, I mean, there's so much to talk about. You can't get into this field and not just keep going. So hopefully today, deeper meanings and around living and transformation and choices that are aligned with our soul's purpose. So welcome to the show, you two.
Well, Tasha, thank you so much for having us on. It's great to be here.
Yes, thank you so much.
I would just like to make two minor corrections.
Sure.
One, you said it would be April 13th. Well, it's August 13th is when our event will be coming up in a few days.
Thank you so much. August 13th. I said April.
Right.
But there is no time. Didn't Einstein say there is no time? I must be somewhere else.
Until we need to meet somewhere.
But there's a much more important correction.
Okay.
I don't know how it crept into your monologue there, but saying that I was in a medically induced coma
is not true.
Completely false, and that's not true one bit.
Well, I'm going to have to find where it was written because that's verbatim written in one of your bios or something.
Well, yeah. Well, it is. It was a mistake by a journalist saying I was in a medically induced coma. So anyway, forget that. The power of the story is because it wasn't medically induced. It was caused by meningoencephalitis that afflicted all lobes of my brain and my brainstem. That's why the scientific community takes my story so seriously. If it were a medically induced coma, they would not be as interested. But I went deep into coma, not on those medications at all, and I came out of coma while on very heavy sedation. So sedation really didn't have anything to do with it.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. We should do something with that journalist. You should have them post a correction or something.
Well, we tried to correct it, but anyway.
It's out there.
That's the truth of the story.
So give us the story, because it really sounds fascinating. And I have also read that you are considered a very important case study. So tell us what happened and how come it's so important.
Okay, well, I think the main point to make is that there was an atypical feature of my near-death experience, that I was amnesic, that I had no memories of my life, no knowledge of Earth, humanity, this universe, which was very important in the evolution of my understanding of it. But it is also atypical, so it's something I have to point out to people. Now, very quickly, because this story can take a long time to tell, it's very long and complex, and I don't want to do that here. I want to make it very brief. It started in what I call the earthworm's eye view, a very primitive course on responsive
tell him
realm.
how you ended up falling into coma.
Okay. So I can't shorten it that much,
But you
can
have
I?
to explain that meningoencephalitis
Yeah.
hit you.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So to make the point, 54 years of living my life, teaching at Harvard Medical School, etc., thinking I understood brain-mind consciousness. I bought into the conventional wisdom brain creates consciousness, but that's what was to now be disproven by my case, and that's why the scientific community takes it very seriously, is because it violates everything we thought we knew about a brain making consciousness. It started in what I call the earthworm's eye view, a very primitive course on responsive realm. But
Okay, so I don't know what that means. Earthworm's eye view. What's
that's
that
what
mean?
I called that realm. In other words, that's where my journey started. And important to point out that this was due to a severe case of bacterial meningoencephalitis that was affecting all lobes of my brain. So that's kind of setting the stage.
So
It's the
describe
amount of damage.
Describe the earthworm eye view.
Yeah, so the earthworm's eye view was this kind of primitive course, like being under dirty jello. I had no body awareness. I had absolutely no memory of my life, no words or language. But I was a witness to what happened around me, just pure awareness. And that seemed to go for a very long time, but it wasn't forever. And I was rescued from that by a slowly spinning white light that came towards me. And it was associated with a musical melody. And this slowly spinning light with melody is what ushered me up out of that ugly earthworm eye view and into this brilliant ultra-real gateway valley, a realm that's far more real than this one. That's a hard part for people to understand, because many people assume a near-death experience is going to be kind of murky and dreamlike. No, no. What the near-death experience shows us is a realm where we're fully engaged with the universe. Very different from this one. In this realm, we're kind of stupefied and dumbed down and don't have memory and connection with the universe like we do in those higher states. But that's why it's so surprising and kind of unexpected when that happens, when we're freed from the shackles of the physical brain and body. Now, in this gateway valley, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing, millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations. There were thousands of beings down below us in this perfect meadow surrounded by forest. That world was like Plato's world of ideals for the soul. There was no death or decay at any place in this Gateway Valley. It was absolutely a world of perfection, of kind of reunite, a place where we reunite with higher souls, souls of departed loved ones, go through life reviews, all those kinds of things. Anyway, for me, the journey involved meeting this beautiful young woman on the butterfly wing. Those who've read the book Proof of Heaven will realize at the end of the book how important she is 4 months after my coma. But the realization is her message to me in that moment was the important message I was to bring back for all. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are deeply cared for. And from that point to this beautiful kind of sense of the breath of God, of this divine wind blowing through, and that was my first remembering of the divine nature, that God force that is fully present all through those realms. And then what I witnessed was the angelic choirs above providing yet another musical pathway. And then I saw all of four-dimensional space-time collapsing down, all of this spiritual realm with a complete different ordering, a higher ordering of causality.
So hold on, I'm going to interrupt you because I want to get into some of these things because
Okay.
for some people, they're brand new. And they're
Okay.
going, what?
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of
we're gonna-
what to it. It's a big story.
let's slow it down. I get that, but we got to enter it a little more deeply. So my question to you is, this is what you're experiencing for everyone. Are there different levels of experience of this spiritual realm, or do you believe it's the same for everyone?
I think it's very similar for everyone. The thing to remember is that a near-death experience is always tailored for the soul that's going through it. So that's the important factor. And, I was a neurosurgeon interested in consciousness. I was also adopted. I'd been put up for adoption at age 11 days by my birth mother, who was an unwed 16-year-old. And that kind of, am I worthy of love question through much of my life had a tremendous amount to do with the unfolding of this particular journey we're describing now.
And what about the life review? Is that based on how you lived your life? Therefore, can everyone anticipate how they're living their life is
What
up for
to
review?
anticipate, the life review has been reported in near-death experiences going back at least 2,400 years. It's a huge part of the fabric of this whole discussion of the spiritual realm is that life review. The important things to point out about the life review: one, it's more like reliving the events than remembering them. Very important distinction, because that time flow, as I said, it's very different in that realm. And that realm in many ways is in an eternal space where we can experience all the moments of our life at the same time in that meta time or deep time. The other important thing about the life review is that we experience it not from our own perspective, but really the emotional perspective of those who are impacted by our thoughts and actions. So the life review in many ways is a beautiful example of how we're all sharing the dreams of the one mind and are all truly in this together.
And just to point out, you were asking, does this happen to everybody? Well, there's also very fascinating studies in the hospice setting where Dr. Christopher Kerr specifically did these studies and asked the people who were actually dying what was going on. And he found that they all, nearly all, started reviewing their life from a very early age. They would just suddenly be presented with events that had happened long, long ago. And in that setting, in the hospice setting, usually those events were the most loving events they'd ever experienced. Not always, but very often. Or they might experience an event that happened that was not so pleasant, but it serves as a growth opportunity. They all end up growing through that process before that moment of death. So those who have near-death experiences are being thrown into it suddenly, into that natural, seemingly natural process. And so it can happen in a very more shocking kind of way.
Right, but the important point about that discussion with Christopher Kerr and his hospice work is that it's identical. It's the same thing as you encounter in near-death experiences. And that is what is so important. We should know that near-death experiences show us what happens when you die, not just when you come near to death. That's a very important point, and important also to point out that in my own particular journey, given that I was amnesic for the life of Eben Alexander, I could not have an Eben Alexander life review. But I did witness life reviews and reincarnation in very powerful fashion in two visions I had in ascending to the core realm. Which I haven't gotten to yet in this story, but that it was shown to me in very powerful fashion how our souls are eternal, and that involves multiple lifetimes. And I didn't realize the scientific evidence supporting reincarnation, but that evidence is huge. Better part of a century spent with people investigating past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation. So we just have a much bigger universe to explain.
And I would have thought as your neuroscience career would have trained you to believe it was a brain-based illusion that people were experiencing. What convinced you that it was more than that?
Well, that's very simple. Has to do with the medical evidence. And I reported a lot of that in Proof of Heaven, the damage to my neocortex. But the good news is there's a medical case report that was written by 3 physicians not involved in my care, but fascinated by my recovery. That report came out in September of 2018 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases. People can get to it on my website at the blog posting for September 2018. You can get right to the report itself.
But what is the evidence?
But the evidence is the amount of damage in the form of neurologic exams. It showed my entire neocortex to be so deeply involved in this destructive bacterial infection. The CT and MRI scans that showed that there was no lobe of my brain that was left unaffected by this, that the entire neocortex was involved and the brainstem was involved, and all of that medical evidence. In fact, for the case reviewers, when they submitted that to the journal, to the peer review editors, the scientific peer reviewers said, well, wait a minute, this case is unprecedented. Somebody this sick from bacterial meningoencephalitis doesn't make a full recovery. How do you explain it? And the 3 doctors who wrote up the case report said it's because he had a near-death experience. And then the peer reviewers said, oh, okay, now we have an explanation. Let's move on. And they published it. In other words, the medical facts are so obvious.
But I think you missed an important point because it's so obvious to you, which is that when the brain is shut down like that, it's not capable of producing a hallucination.
Right.
This is what materialist
That's the
scientists
point.
know. You need the brain to even have a memory of an experience, and that's what
And
changes
with that
everything.
kind of damage to my neocortex and brainstem, I could not have had a dream or a hallucination or any kind of confabulation, any kind of mental experience at all, other than the most primitive, rudimentary. And that's the exact opposite of what I experienced. What I experienced was the most extraordinary, detailed, meaningful, powerful, and memorable set of events that I've ever been through in my life.
And that's exactly, interestingly, what the people who are dying say, that they feel more alive than they've ever felt when they have these end-of-life dreams and visions, which are very similar to what near-death experiencers describe. So I think we can be pretty confident that we know what's going to happen in that process leading up to death.
And so to you, let's bring in this idea or this word, God. Let's bring that into this realm, which is not a word I use a lot. Consciousness I do, spirituality I do, because it has such connotations, such religious dogma and associated with it. But what's your experience of the divine? Let's call it that, or the spirituality, this realm. What was being in this realm? What did spending time there convince you of in terms of this?
Well, a lot of it also involves my work in the 14 years since then as a neurosurgeon, working with hundreds of scientists around the world to try and understand it all. But to get right to your question, I think most near-death experiencers...
What did you experience? You experienced God.
Yeah, I absolutely experienced a oneness with God,
Yes.
period. Just absolute fact given. Now,
So, no, say more. What? Because we're,
well, I'm going to say a lot more.
About that.
My interpretation now is that our very conscious awareness that each and every one of us has, this gift of being alive and aware of existence, in many ways is very directly sourced to that pure force of infinite healing love that people call God, that they encounter in those deepest aspects of this journey.
And
a
interestingly,
beautiful, loving force that's at home. It's our spiritual home. It's not separate from us at all.
But you called it
Well, that's the other thing, is in the book Proof of Heaven, I made it clear that coming back from this journey, to me, the word God was a puny little human word. It had a ton of baggage.
Yeah.
It was worthless to describe that incredibly powerful, awesome, majestic, and deeply personal force of love and wholeness that I encountered, that God force. And that's the way I see it now. I think there's a very simple way to put all this together, really. And that's what's evolving in the scientific view of all this, of what's called objective idealism, which
Right.
is a position that we argue in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. That's the third book that Karen and I wrote together. And we go into a multidisciplinary demonstration of objective idealism, of the mental layer of the universe, this top-down causality. And we as sentient beings have access to that mental layer, and that's why we can have free will that has influence on this world. But it's important to realize that will is coming from mind, the origins of which are far beyond the physical world and the brain and body, but really at the origins of existence of the entire universe. And that's where I would see that God force as being so important, and seeing it as a co-creative force, and that we each have access to it. But the interesting and best feature of all this is that deep on those journeys, as the vast majority of near-death experiencers will tell you, at that level of creation of the source of the universe, there's not some battle between good and evil where the forces of evil might someday win. It's pure love. And the apparent evil and darkness that we see in our lives is something that emerges as you get a long way away from that core of love of that God force into the periphery of the universe, in this material world where we live and kind of struggle with our understanding of it. We're a long way removed from it, but that doesn't mean we're not still in direct connection to it. And that's why it's incredible that in hospice work, in near-death work, in the near-death experiences, etc., you keep finding the same thing. And that's this very reassuring presence of a loving force that I would say has shaped our religious beliefs going back thousands of years through all of the great prophets. And to this day, to the extent that any religion hews very tightly to love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, forgiveness, that religion is, a voice of the prophets carrying on this message that indie ears would shout out in great numbers, this power of love, and that we need to return love to this universe. So in many ways, this is a tremendous revolution in our understanding about consciousness, about the nature of that God force and what that is. But I would say that what's emerging from the world of NDEs is very much this beautiful vision of love. And I'm worried we might have lost our internet connection here.
No, we see you and hear you. You're good.
You see and hear?
Yeah,
Well,
you're
awesome.
good. Good. I get to get a question in there now.
Okay.
Is the game changer for me is the recognition that there is no separation between whether you call it God or love, but that force you're talking about and ourselves. So in that interconnection, everything changes. Everything that you brought just now to the table about how we live our lives, how fractured people are perceiving things with the polarities, this side or that side, all of it is an illusion if you source yourself in this understanding, yes, that I am love, and that's all there is, truly.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful way of putting it, and that keeps it nice and simple. You don't have to invoke any 2,000-year-old religious scripture to support this. All you have to do is look at the experiences of people today, dying and near death, to get the answers about what happens when our physical bodies die. And it's not the bleak, nihilistic fiction of materialism that tries to pretend that you just disappear and there's no more conscious awareness. In fact, we come into much more conscious awareness than we're really used to. It's an astonishing gift. And the other point I'd make that goes along the lines of what you're saying is a recognition, as I said in the book Proof of Heaven, calling that force Om was a way for me to acknowledge that it's meaningless whether you want to choose to call it God or Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit, etc., etc., etc. The truth of that force of love is what we're here to express. And it doesn't depend on any kind of ideologies and the false kind of separational fictions that humans have come up with to try and control other human beings through religion for thousands of years. So this is really about a unification that acknowledges the oneness we share with the universe, the oneness of mind, that we're all bound together through these forces of love. And if we have to wait our whole lives to discover it, we do when we leave the physical world. But why wait that long? Why not discover it today, to live your life properly today, treat yourself properly today for the divine and sacred being you are, connected with others through this loving force of forgiveness, kindness, mercy, and acceptance.
So we're going to get to ways to connect with this because I want to get real specific. I love offering the listeners tools because everyone can do this. They don't have to die to do this, right, Karen? But
Exactly.
before we segue there, I just want to know why you feel, or do you feel, that it's important to bridge spirituality and science?
Well, I think it's absolutely essential. In fact, I would say that neither science nor spirituality can properly move forward from our current impasse without going through this awakening shift, this paradigm shift in understanding of our culture at large. And it's a deep truth that was discovered by spiritual journeyers thousands of years ago about oneness and the binding force of love. But our modern culture has been so fragmented by materialist science and this false sense of separation that we've fallen a long way away from it, although luckily most people in prayer and meditation can pretty quickly discover that they're connected to the universe in ways that are very beautiful and empowering, and that absolutely involve love and kindness and mercy for themselves and for others, the way they treat others. So that's the important lesson that our very fractured and polarized world is now to learn very solidly.
So Karen, if I may ask you a personal question, because I know you've got your fingers in lots of different pies, what modality most impacted you? What was it for you that really stirred your awakening and went, whoa, wait?
Well, sound was really the key because I had learned and I was going to classes in kind of other types of things that meditation was very important. But I was a busy project manager. I can, multitask like nobody's business. And so when I would try to meditate, just sit and pay attention to my breath, all I would have happen is all of my thoughts would just keep racing through my head. And I thought, oh my gosh, where's my samadhi? Where is that bliss? I was so impatient. That's the Western mind. We want it to happen so quickly. And of course, like anything else, playing the piano or football or something, some of us have natural ability, but others of us, we need to practice and develop skills and tools. And some of those tools may be different from one person to the next. But when I found sound, things like tuning forks, brass bowls, gongs, crystal bowls, beautiful sounds with all of these overtones, that's when my mind would start to quiet. That's when I could find that relaxation and that peace inside. And what I eventually learned is those instruments are emitting something known as binaural beats. And that's what my company, Sacred Acoustics, we create these recordings with digital frequencies. Sometimes we work in musical instruments as well, but this allows us to create very precise signals that entrain the brain to lower states of awareness, states of awareness like theta and alpha that are associated with better focus, with meditation, with creativity and intuitive development. Most of us are, when we're walking around and talking, we're in that beta state. And that's where those thoughts are just so incessant. So we can take the time to quiet those thoughts, find that inner peace inside, and that becomes the foundation, really, the gateway to opening your connection to that something greater. All of this, one mind that Eben's been talking about. Our pathway to that is through our inner world and quieting that incessant voice to find what's behind it. And that's what we all can do.
And Tasha, I'd just like to add for clarification here that I was attracted to binaural beats within about 2 years of my coma, knowing I needed a very powerful way of getting into deep meditation and understanding how profound differential frequency brainwave entrainment had been proven to be in cases of out-of-body experiences and remote viewing, one of the most studied scientific validations of extrasensory perception that is there. And I was driven to that, and it's because these sounds have an influence on the lower brainstem. So they're very different from every other sound you've ever heard that might have influenced, say, a chant or anthem, a hymn, that might have influenced a transcendental state of awareness. Those are all processed up in the acoustic cortex of the temporal lobes, circuits that have basically evolved over the last 2 to 3 million years, very different from the lower brainstem, 300 million year old circuits that are processing the binaural beat brainwave entrainment. And that's one of the reasons why they're so powerful, because you're going so far back in the evolutionary and anatomic chain of the generation of consciousness.
And there's a lot of frequencies out there. I'm also fascinated by binaural beats and find them extremely effective. But it's like this menu now, this potpourri of, 527 and 3, all these different frequencies. And I think for an average person, how do they know which is the one for them? Is it truly just experience it and see, or do you offer, especially in this upcoming talk that you're doing with Shift, are you offering some understanding to help people find their path in this experience?
Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head. It really is a matter of experience. It's we can describe it. We can say the potential, the patterns of responses that people have. There's a very wide range. But really, to know how it's going to affect you, you got to try it yourself. And that's why we do offer a free 20-minute Om download on our website. Pop your email in there and we'll send a link to you. And there's also something called the Whole Mind Bundle on our website that people can try. It actually, there is a free option on that one. I made it free as an option for people at the beginning of the pandemic a couple years ago, because they were found in a pilot study, these particular recordings, to reduce anxiety by 26% after 2 weeks of listening. So in the control group, who they only had 7% reduction of anxiety using regular therapy techniques, psychiatric therapy. But sound really does seem to hit people in a deeper place, that vibrational space. And that's where, you can really get those thoughts and distracting negative talk out of the way and really get to the essence of who we are. At our event, we will be, on August 13th, we will be having playing a recording for everyone to experience together. It's actually related to the united souls of earth, where really all souls on earth are joined as one, and we can experience that spiritually through our feeling. And so we will be doing that together as a group during that event.
And Tasha, I'd just like to add, it's important people know that listen through headphones.
Yes.
These tones have the greatest power through headphones.
And that's because we're putting one signal in one ear, a little bit different signal in the other ear.
And that's what drives all the power, is the difference between the two.
And that's that wah, wah, wah sound. So.
And then also the pilot study that Karen mentioned, it's peer-reviewed. It's in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in September 2018 by Dr. Anna Yusim, Y-U-S-I-M.
And are you adding voice to this? What's your take on adding either subliminal or verbal messages to facilitate healing and transformation along with the binaural beats?
Yeah, very good question. We include nothing subliminal at all. We think that it needs to be out there. We just don't understand the power of subliminal messages enough to do that.
Why people do that.
To someone. However, using your mind, setting intention, engaging your mind, engaging your feeling sense is highly important. And, there is such a thing as passive listening. And passive listening, you may still experience results, especially if all you're looking for is a way to help fall asleep, which is why many people listen to these recordings. Or if you're using them in the background to help you study or something like that. But if you're using them for meditation, engaging your mind is so powerful. Setting an intention, having a purpose for that meditation, even if it's just, I want to trust, I want to open and trust, or say you just want to relax. It could be as simple as that, but they can also get very complex. If you want to solve a problem, or if you have a vexing relationship issue, you can use meditation to find a broader perspective on situations. You can set your energy for different states. Resonance is highly important because resonance is, well, you do a better job of explaining resonance.
Well, it's
simply.
a constructive interference, and that's how we recognize things in that realm. And
But
the energetic signature is due to that frequency.
Energetic signature is a beautiful way of saying it. Yeah, so all of us are emitting a certain energetic signature. And energetic signatures are attracted to each other. So the energy you put out is what is really influencing the unfolding reality around you. So if you can go within, clear out, something I did was I began to get emotional when I was listening to these recordings. And I learned that I was tapping into long ago emotional hurts and feelings I had never properly processed, but just neatly put away, thinking that I could just put them inside myself and they would go away, but they didn't. They stay there. And that's what got in the way when I first tried to meditate. That's what I would run into. And so the tones really helped me release a lot of those old emotional hurts and pains. And the reward is what then is replaced with that when you start to focus on this love, when you start to let go and trust that some force in the universe has your back and is there with you. When you can do that, that's when you start to becoming more of that spiritual essence. And people notice. You may not notice at first because it can happen gradually, but people will start saying, did you change your hair? Or is there something about your makeup or something like that? They'll start to see that you just look different.
That glow.
So this is something we all can do through trial and error, finding those techniques that work for us. And if one technique doesn't work, you move on to the next. All of us can do this. The reason it's so important is because we are all connected through this one mind. Scientifically, this has been shown. And so everything we do affects other people in this world, whether we realize it or not, because we feel so separate. And so when we can get in touch with that connection and feel that spiritual connection, we realize that everything we do is affecting others. So anytime anyone, for example, will take time to explore that whole mind bundle, any form of meditation, our free Om recording, whatever it is, I am grateful because I know that when each of us takes that time, that it's actually the ultimate golden rule, where you treat another as you would like to be treated. Clear your stuff, become that soul living with purpose. You're not only helping yourself, you're helping all of us and the people around you especially.
So you've said some really important things in there. I just want to dig in a little bit. So we're talking about when your mind is quiet, you're also referencing your emotions are clear, so you're neutral. And I'm sure you must offer ways to achieve emotional neutrality and manage emotions, right? Both
Yes,
essential. So
yes.
that will be in your August, you'll touch on that August 13th a little bit?
We may touch on that. We will absolutely touch on it during the 7-week course that follows up that free event. So
Right.
yes, we will
Touch
absolutely
on it pretty deeply,
be getting
actually.
into that.
So,
yes.
so what's your favorite modality for achieving neutrality in the moment of a tsunami? Because it is, right? And the brain,
Yeah.
you know, your brain's being flooded. All of a sudden you're in fight flight. Like it's just like when I was 7 or whatever it is. Boom.
Exactly.
You're
Well,
in it.
what's-
What do
well,
you
what
offer?
is so useful is practicing the perspective of the inner observer when you're in meditation. When you can practice that perspective, you'll find that you sort of have a dual awareness. You have an awareness of the emotions that you're expressing, but at the same time you have an awareness of that observer who has a broader perspective. And so then eventually when you're in one of those events that you said where you're triggered, well, you can have these emotions, but another part of you is like, whoa, wait a minute. It can start to analyze and feed you information on how to bring that situation down. And I've done that myself. Eben can attest to that.
Right.
I don't
Beautifully.
always realize in that moment, but that
Yep.
practice of meditation is not just to escape this world. It's actually to bring you tools to use in this world so that you can be a more balanced, harmonious kind of person. And other people, again, they notice. So many people, they're other-centered. They think that paying attention to themselves is somehow that word selfish. It's not good. You have to help others. And that's true. But if you don't help yourself at all, you're not helping others as well as you could. So I like to imagine a world where everyone grows up kind of having that inner sense of knowing and connection. And as they grow up and interact with other people, there's this sense of compassion, this sense of understanding. And I imagine a world where all of us know how to do this. And so we may get triggered through hurts, but then the level of compassion we all have would be so much greater. We would get through them in a much more productive fashion, I believe. So learning these tools helps all of us.
I think it's important to point out that that little voice in our head, so many of us identify with the voice in our head as who we are. I love how Michael Singer in his book, The Untethered Soul, he says that voice in your head is your annoying roommate. And that's a very important kind of statement of fact of the way that I would deal with meditation and kind of my worldview since then, because I put my little Eben Alexander ego into timeout. It can state a request, make an intention, ask a question, what have you, but in meditation I ride the tones. And
But,
the more
but
you can
what's
learn to do
riding
that,
the tones is your observer.
is the observer, is
neutral
the awareness.
observer.
That's the part of you that expands with the death of the physical brain and body. The part that near-death experiencers are so shocked to discover when they go through what they go through. And as Christopher Carr's determined, also it happens in hospice work, the very same kind of awareness and awakening to a much grander self. But in meditation, we can practice that daily to acknowledge that we're connected with the universe in ways that go far beyond that little ego self. The ego can be very toxic, and that's what we see in our modern world, this false sense of separation from materialist thinking, kind of egos out of control, because what we're talking about is the binding force of love and an acknowledgement that people discover the oneness of life and their shared consciousness when they leave the physical world. And that should be a lesson to all of us while we're living in this world, that we're truly connected, that it's through the binding force of love. And the more we can learn from indie ears about this world and its grander implications, the more we can grow into the souls we truly came here to be.
So what is the heart of consciousness? You use that in the title of your book. And how is it related to the brain?
Well, the brain serves as a filter that allows in consciousness, but that heart of consciousness, what we're talking about, is always unified. There's one mind, not many minds. And we really share that. And so what this is just an acknowledgement of our common kind of experience and our common will. our ability to kind of work together to bring peace and love, health, wholeness, and healing to ourselves and to fellow beings. It's within our grasp, but it involves working for the higher good and not being a slave to this silly ego and what it demands of us. I mean, the ego would much rather see the host dead than see itself dead. That's why addictions and alcoholism are so deadly.
But the heart of consciousness kind of had a double meaning in
does.
the title. The heart of something is usually the center of it.
The essence of it, the crux.
But it also, the heart of consciousness, Eben so often talks about the one mind, and I like to say, well, what about the one heart? Heart Math Institute, which I just love the research they've done, they show us that our hearts are all emitting an electromagnetic field that goes out beyond our body, and it actually is influencing people around us. They've done studies, so whatever you're holding in your heart is actually being broadcast to the world and having some effect on people around you. And so paying attention to that heart is very, very key if you want to understand consciousness. It's more of a feeling state than a, literal verbal state. That's where you really feel that connection to the spiritual realm.
And I think the important point to make, as we stress in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, is the concrete reality of that mental layer, that kind of top-down layer of organization, of information assimilation and integration. And we have access to that as human beings, as sentient beings, access to that mental realm. Now, in scientific circles, in philosophical discussions of the brain-mind relationship, you'll often see people, starting from this position of materialism, pretending brain creates consciousness, but that doesn't work, and it never leads us to an answer. So then modern scientists say, well, we have to be at least dualistic about it. Dualism admitting to the physical world, brain and everything else, body, etc., and then also the mental world, the world of phenomenal experience. And all we're doing is saying that in reality, it's really the spiritual. It's not mind over matter. It's really spirit over matter. And by putting in the word spirit, you're simply saying that that mental layer is all interconnected, that we all interconnect with each other. And that's very apparent in the scientific works, so like Larry Dossey's book, One Mind, our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, Stephen Taylor's book, Spiritual Science. These are all good examples of modern scientific evidence integrating science and spirituality by extending this concept of duality and mind physical to just saying, well, it's really ultimately all connected in that mental space, and that's what we call spiritual. And that's that God force at work.
And so let's talk about the event that's coming up August 13th. It's 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. What can participants expect to experience?
Well, we're really going to talk a lot about what we've been talking about here. We'll get into more of the data that shows the commonalities between near-death experiences and actual death. We'll get more into how we are all connected with one mind. It's really a wonderful overview of a lot of what we've been talking about today, but
right,
a little
we'll be
deeper.
Expanding on it a lot, plus giving people an experiential.
Right.
With an active meditation and then with a debrief afterward to discuss what the kind of things that people experience. So it'll be, a kind of a major overview in a scientific sense, but also very importantly, a deep dive for the individual to gain tools to discover this for themselves.
The main message that we're trying to give people, especially in that event, is that, what happens when we die is certainly interesting and important to consider, but the ramifications of all that affect how we live our lives now. And that's the most important thing. How can we take this information of what happens when we die to really live our life to the fullest? Because when people end up on their deathbed, they have regrets, they have sorrow, they have things they wish they would have done differently. So what if you could get to the end of your life and you're like, I did it, that was awesome, I did everything I wanted to. And so this is really the message that we are hitting home with.
And I imagine offering quite a bit of solace to people who are afraid of dying. It takes the fear out of the equation and becomes a part of being alive.
Yes, not only that, this idea of consciously approaching death, but what about all the loved ones that people have lost? How can we still stay in touch with them? How can we know that they're going to be awaiting us when we end up passing over to the other side. Staying in touch with those loved ones is very possible. And that's another thing that we'll be able to, that we'll be going over.
Right.
I do want you to touch on it. I know we're almost running out of time, but when you're on the other side, across that veil, can you make contact because you choose to, or is there some other ingredient
When
required?
you're on the other side, what mediums tell us is that it absolutely is driven by those who are on the other side. So those who are motivated or have the ability or whatever it may be to make themselves known, yes, it's very possible. And I would think that the more conscious you are as you move towards death, say, the more skilled you are at lucid dreaming, where you can awaken in a dream and manage that dream consciously and know that you're dreaming. If you can do things like that by the time you die, you're aware, it's not going to be any different. You'll just be shifting into a new state, but that awareness will continue. And so we will be talking about that as well.
Well, the beauty of that is, and what I love so much about, it's not preparing for death, but it's getting back in touch with your essential nature while you're alive, with all the ways you've just described. And then it guarantees that when you do die, it's going to be a breeze, like you said, as opposed to what is this?
This idea of spirituality, we'll also be reviewing is this idea that we're connected to something greater, whatever that may be. It's the idea that there's meaning to our daily lives, and the idea that there's a purpose, a larger purpose for why we are here. And those are the questions that each of us can learn to answer for ourselves, and that changes everything about how you live your life in the here and now.
So the event is called Harness the Wisdom, Wonder, and Life-Affirming Power of Near-Death Experiences. 10 a.m., August 13th. It's free, which is amazing. And you can sign up. I know Mark put up a link on consciouslivingradio.com. And also, what is your website? Do you want to share that with the listeners right now?
Well, we have sacredacoustics.com and ebenalexander.com.
EBEN Alexander.com.
But your listeners should know that if they cannot make the live event, I know we have viewers and listeners all over the world. If you're in the wrong time zone or you have something going on, they'll send you a link to the recording when it's finished. Yeah.
So.
What's your wish for the world from your heart? Just take a second, each of you, to come from a feeling place and offer the world your wish.
Well, it's really just that this awakening happened, that we all come into a much greater state of peace and harmony with each other, with our fellow beings, and in many ways peace with this world, because Homo sapiens means wise. Sure, we've done some brilliant things with science and technology and with arts and humanities over the last many centuries, but the reality is we're also facing kind of the dark, ugly underbelly of some of those successes, especially, say, the corporate greed, addiction to fossil fuels, etc. And that's all a false sense of separation. And this awakening can help the world tremendously by allowing us to be proper stewards of this planet for ourselves and for others, and not so greedy and rapacious with the way we treat the planet, but much more kind and gentle with ourselves and with the world at large.
And leading right into that is my hope would be is that every individual on this planet understands they are vital and integral to the whole. No soul left behind. There are lonely, disenfranchised, confused people out there, or maybe people who appear to have it all together, but inside they just don't really. And all of you are integrally important. And anyone who takes the time to do this really receives the deepest gratitude for getting to know yourself. This is probably the most important any of us can do, getting to know ourselves, our true spiritual self, not just the roles we play here on earth. And so this, I think, will lead to what Eben is hoping for in the world, because our outer world is a reflection of our inner world. And so the more of us who take the time to do this, the more the outer world will rearrange itself to accommodate our inner worlds.
Right. I mean, this is the shift from me to we.
Yes.
Even though you must know me, like we have to know ourselves. But
Yes.
joining in that mission is so exciting, and it takes some of the pain out of what people are perceiving. right? Because we can look at many of the things that are happening right now and interpret them as painful or negative. But when I listen to you both, it's clear to me that there is a deeper purpose to this unraveling, and it's going to bring us to a place of unity.
Well, and really painful, uncomfortable events are our engines for growth.
Right.
That's what helps us to learn and grow. Without those kinds of things, we would not have the same level of growth. And so you often after such a thing, we realize what all those lessons were. But during, oh my gosh, it can be so painful.
Right. Well, I appreciate you joining today. Looking forward to hearing more about your work, and thank you. I mean, I just totally love what you're about and that you're bringing it to the world. So again, August 13th, we've been speaking with Dr. Eben Alexander, Karen Newell, and you're listening to Conscious Living Radio, Wednesday night, 6 to 7, Co-op Radio, CFRO here in Vancouver. I'm Tasha Simms. Mark Cron somewhere there. He's going to pop in, I hope, in a second. Thank you again for joining us.